Hey guys, this is Mark. Welcome back. In this video, I will talk about flow triggers, which is a very important concept that exists in our product. Most of the flows you will create will contain at least one trigger. Not all of them, but it's going to be quite common to use triggers. So what is a trigger? Well, just like everything else in FlowRunner, it's a block that you place into your flow. And the triggers, there is a bunch of them in FlowRunner. Some of them are internal to the backend of the system, and they work with the database that you have in your workspace. They could work with the file storage. They could work with the users, such as when a user account is created, a trigger will let your flow know that that has happened. So conceptually, it is a block that really just sits and waits for something to occur. And that something is completely up to you where and when that happens. Some triggers are very specific, such as the ones that I mentioned, and some could be just completely open-ended. It is a trigger, for example, external callback trigger. It is a trigger that has a URL that you can use in an external system, and whenever that external system uses that URL and the trigger is sitting and waiting, then trigger will wake up and then the flow will continue. In fact, in the very first flow that you and I built, the receipt scanner flow, you already used a trigger. And that was the trigger that was waiting for a file that you, for the image that you took with your smartphone was uploaded into the system. So triggers are useful because they allow you to model a real world, a real workflow in FlowRunner. Triggers may not necessarily be the very first thing that sits in your flow. Your flow could start with an action, and we'll talk about the actions later. And then as flow does something, it may need to sit and wait for something else to happen. For example, let's say that you're building some very smart, intelligent sales rep, the one that searches for leads, and that's the automation, finds those leads, crafts an email with AI to a prospect, and then it needs to sit and wait for the response. Can you do that in FlowRunner? Absolutely. And that would be a good example of having a trigger in the middle of your flow. Or for example, one of our sample flows, which is called basic approval, it is a flow that has a trigger right in the middle where you send out an email with a link to an approval page, and whoever is in charge, a person in charge, gets this email, opens up that email in the browser, and they either have to approve or deny. I think it was a time off request. So in this case, again, a trigger sits in the middle of the flow, waiting for the approval or rejection decision. Whether you put a trigger at the very beginning of your flow or somewhere in the middle of your flow, or even the end of the flow, if it makes any sense in the context of what you're automating, you can narrow down the scope of that trigger by using conditions. And I know I'm getting ahead of myself again. We haven't even discussed conditions yet, but there is this whole area in FlowRunner that is dedicated to conditions when you add some rules. So a condition is like a rule, and you can attach that rule to a trigger to narrow down the rules or the times when that trigger really needs to wake up. For example, if we go back to the automation that you and I created for the receipt scanner, the way it was built, it was a file upload trigger listening for any kind of file upload. But in your application, you could have receipts uploaded into one directory, invoices uploaded into another directory, and something else, some any other content uploaded somewhere else. Do you want your receipt scanner to wake up every single time whenever a file is uploaded? No. And it's very easy to narrow down that scope of the trigger to a very specific directory, for example. And when we start getting to conditions, I'll talk about that as well. But for now, what you need to remember and understand is that there are multiple triggers. Some of them are very specialized. Some of them are very generic, and they pause your flow until something happens. And the same thing goes for external services, like, for example, with Gmail and Google Sheets and Google Drive and Airtable, there are triggers that are powered by that external system. Triggers, there are two different types of triggers. So there are triggers that are instant, like real-time triggers, and whenever something happens in the external system, in real time, it will notify FlowRunner. And there are polling triggers. And polling triggers, you can configure them with the frequency of how often they need to check the external system for whatever the changes are. Okay, and then the frequency could be as short as 30 seconds and as long as whatever you specify. And I think there is going to be an extension that you can purchase that will reduce that polling frequency to be even shorter. So that's all you need to know. Oh, there is one more thing. Whenever trigger is activated, like for example, whenever you had the trigger for file upload, that trigger is activated with some data. Okay, you can get access to the data in your FlowRunner automation. Even with the generic trigger, which is called external callback, whenever that URL that is specified by that block is used in an external system, you can pass additional data into that URL, essentially just attaching data, it's called body, with that URL request. Whatever data that comes in becomes available in your flow as the trigger event data, which means in your flow, in other subsequent blocks, you can use the data that was provided to activate that trigger. Now that's everything. So I hope you found this lecture useful, and I'm sure you will have a lot of fun with triggers. There is a very cool feature that was recently added that I will cover in a separate video called the learning mode. And I think the learning mode makes triggers even more interesting. But until then, thank you for watching, and as always, happy automating.